question we go to Puebla, Mexico. Go ahead, please.
Sí, muchas gracias. Buenos días para todos.
The question states, an important factor is health. And what different strategies should companies implement to promote good health, especially taking into consideration the differences between the generations?
Well, you want to maintain a healthy and active employee labor pool. I mean, your older workers and your younger workers will need to have good health to be productive and stay in the workforce. A lot of companies have instituted company-wide programs that enable people to perhaps join a health club. Others have got on-site activities, bringing in someone who can lead an exercise class, offering various kinds of incentives to employees to improve their health. Some places actually pay money for employees to reduce their weight or to take up an activity or offer time off. So, I mean, there are a lot of strategies companies can pursue. Most companies do not actively pursue improved and maintaining good health as a strategy, but I think it would be a very good idea, especially as the workforce ages.
Great. Thank you. For our next question, we go to Medellin, Colombia again. Go ahead, please.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días.
And good morning. Buenos dias. It is clear that as time goes by, we are losing our risk factor and we are more analytical and sometimes not very aggressive in the good sense. And this is said to be because we are more responsible. And younger people are more innovative and they want change. Now, we don't only see this factor in companies, for example, we see it in everyday life. But now specifically taking into consideration, for example, the business environment and how we make decisions, should we find some sort of balance, or should one generation have more weight than another in order to achieve our objectives? Thank you very much.
That's an excellent question, and a complicated question. But yes, there has to be a balance, because you can't just have risk-taking and you can't just have caution and achieve something. But I think that the caller has made a really good point, which is we become more risk-averse. Aging societies become more cautious as a whole and more unwilling to innovate or take chances. The important thing, I think, is that employers have to make a commitment to being willing to listen to people who want to innovate, who want to take risks, understanding that they might not implement exactly what the younger or more risk-taking employee wants. It might be tempered. But I think you have to make a commitment to that. You're right. I mean, one of the most disturbing trends in some respects is that business has become very cautious and conservative. And during difficult economic times, this is common. But in the long run, innovation and taking some risks and being creative and coming up with new strategies is how we succeed. So we can't give that up.
Great. Our next question comes from Mexico. Go ahead, please.
We're calling from the University Tecnológica de Tecámac. We've commented on the benefits of a multi-generational team, but what is the strategy, or how can we integrate these innovative ideas from the younger generations and the experience from the older generations? How can we integrate both of them?
Another excellent question.
Well, again, it's really important that the business have a commitment to this, and this has to come from the top down. So whoever is the CEO, the president, the leader of the business or organization has got to be willing to make this part of the business strategy. So it has to be integrated into the business's plan of operations, plan of future. So you have to make it part of your business culture or your organizational culture. But beyond that, you also have to give permission to younger adults to speak up. They're not necessarily going to do so without explicit invitations because they tend to defer to their elders. And you have to remind older workers that they were young once and wanted to remake the world, and they should have more understanding and sympathy and be willing to listen.
Great. I guess we are staying in Mexico for the next question. We go to August Calientes, please. Go ahead.
Buenos días a todos.
Good morning. Some of the smaller companies are not able to have different generations in their workplace. However, these organizations have to compete with larger companies that do have these multi-generational team members. How can small companies compete with these larger ones?
That's another good question and a difficult one. Obviously, in an ideal world, you could have all the resources you need within one company, but you're not going to. And that's where it can be important to do your homework, do research, look outside. You don't have to be 20 years old to have some understanding of a 20-year-old, any more than you have to be 50 to understand a 50-year-old. You do have to be open to learning, though, and you have to seek the opinions of people in your target age group. So if everyone is young, they need to go out and talk to older people who are not part of the company. Older people need to go out and talk to younger people. There are ways of getting this input, even using consultants occasionally from another generation. But you have to be conscious that if you have a single generation making up most of your workforce, that your view is going to be somewhat limited by that. And seek out, you can personally seek out that other point of view by just going and talking to people of different generations.
Excellent recommendation. And we stay in Mexico. We go to Sabinas Cojila, please. Go ahead.
Good morning from the Instituto Tecnológico. At the beginning of the video conference, you talked about adults who are retiring. There are a lot of older adults that want to keep working, however, they qualify for retirement and they have to retire. So, should institutions change their rules in order to establish that retirement should retire when they are no longer productive, or should this be an important factor and not age, for example?
Yes. That's the easy answer, yes. Already in the U.S., we have had to address this question because if people leave the workforce, if everyone leaves the workforce at age 60 or so, which is what's happening right now, we're going to have simply too many people who are retired and too few people who are working, and they will not be able to help support the older retirees. And it's crucial. It will not even be an option. At some point, there will be no choice for all countries as the population ages. They will have to come up with new laws, new policies, and new approaches to older adults that allow them to stay in the workforce as long as they want to and are able.
Excellent. Thank you. And we stay in Mexico. We go to Tepic Nayarit. Please go ahead.
Good morning. We think that you have made a very adequate approach in terms of multi-generational teams in the workplace. However, I do believe that there are also disadvantages, and I would really appreciate if you could mention these. And on the other hand, if you see a tendency in companies to hire younger people, how to convince these companies that the presence of multi-generational teams really is a benefit, especially in terms of productivity. Thank you very much.
In terms of disadvantages or obstacles, let's call them, people who are not open to being part of a multi-generational team, say someone who is older and feels that as an older adult, they should simply be deferred to. They should be the leader and no one else should have input. Obviously, that is not someone that's going to work well on a multi-generational team. You need to have an open mind. So there are obstacles you have to overcome. But, and you are correct, there is a tendency to hire younger people. And in some senses, this is an understandable strategy of companies who feel they want to have someone with them a very long time. But the reality is people change jobs. Younger people are more likely to leave a job than are older workers. Older workers tend to be better workers. In spite of concerns about their health, they tend to show up on time. They tend to have more experience and discipline as an employee. So I think one of the strategies for convincing companies is to show them the many ways in which older workers are in fact excellent, loyal, hardworking, a good benefit to the company.
Thank you for your questions. Let's now move to the second module of our program.
Joining us now is Don Hollis. As the creative director of the advertising company Hollis Design, Don has had the opportunity to develop advertising campaigns for both large and small companies. Having spent a number of years in the field, he has also been witness to a number of advertising successes and failures. Many times these failures have been the result of not taking into account generational differences, both within the creative team and the advertiser's target market. During this segment, Don will elaborate on the importance of taking these differences into account when creating an advertising and marketing campaign. Welcome, Don.
Thanks, Susan.
Frequently, advertising needs to reach a specific demographic or age group, and it needs to do so without alienating other age groups. So, for instance, you might be planning a campaign that will target 30-year-olds, people in their early 30s, but you don't want the campaign to alienate the potential customers on either side of that age group. How can multi-generational teams benefit in the effort to do this?
Like building any team, it's important to understand the key strengths of all the members of the team. Older, more experienced professionals are going to bring perspective and experience level. They've already been through a lot of scenarios. They've already learned from their mistakes. And so they're very helpful in helping a younger team who might take a more radical or different approach from avoiding some of the same pitfalls that they might have made in the past.
So when you have a team, as we were saying before, let's take our example of the people in their early 30s. Let's say that's your target market. If you apply what you're talking about now, you've got older individuals on this team who might not have quite as much of a link to this 30-something group. and yet they have the experience of many marketing campaigns behind them for all kinds, targeting not just different age groups, but perhaps different ethnic groups or different men, women, different children, whatever. So you're saying that, in a sense, even though they're not part of that generation, their experience might be brought to bear on the effort that comes out of the group that targets this 30-something group.
Sure. The process, whether you're young or older, is still the same. There's a creative process you need to go through. We always start with a creative brief and a series of questions so that whatever audience we're doing, and it works conversely. Sometimes we're working on a campaign that's dealing with an older market. So it actually works both ways, and younger people understanding what's going on there and vice versa. You get the younger team gains the experience, the mentorship, the steering through that process, that experience that the older team has, and the older team gains from the younger side, and that the fresher ideas, the tapping into that market, the immediate first-hand understanding of that audience group. So. Right. Now, what are some of the difficulties that might arise if you've got a creative team with people from 2 or 3 4 different generations? What sort of obstacles, what kinds of difficulties might arise in keeping this group working well together? The solution is working with the end in mind, and that's about the client, its product and service, and then the specific needs of the audience. What do they want? What do they need? What are they looking for in this particular product? And basically the team as a facilitator to help connect those two groups and bring them closer together. So you have to get outside of your own, I'm young, I'm older, I'm this, I'm that. It's really looking at how you can work synergistically to bring that together and solve those two problems. You can't create a brand or a product from a client's side without listening to who your audience is, and vice versa. You can't just know that we want to tap into this audience but have a product that doesn't make any sense to them. You actually mentioned something I think that's very interesting, which is having a facilitator. And I think that might be applicable not just in a creative process like yours, but in other work teams where there's multi-generational participation. It seems like that's a really good point, because having a facilitator there who's conscious of the potential problems of integrating people of different generations into a cohesive team, and not just focused on taking a bunch of individuals, but being aware that they come from a different place, they have a different understanding of things, have different levels of experience because they are of different generations and age groups, is a really key part of making it work with the facilitator. Now, one of the things that you also mentioned is having, we talked earlier about having sort of, having the creative resonance, the ability to understand what works with your generation. How important is that? It's especially today. People grow up more than ever before savvy to marketing messages and advertising, and from the time they're able to watch the first television show as a baby, there's advertising messages that are filtering into that window and into their minds, making them buy toys and products, and Mom, I want this, and Dad, I want this. It starts at a very early age. By the time you've reached your teen years and beyond, you're very experienced in receiving those messages, and you know there's a savvy that's there. You know people are trying to sell you a product or a service, and you're trying to get you to buy something. So there needs to be a sincerity and an authenticity that's communicated in that process. Again, understanding what their true wants and needs are and how you're going to fill those needs and solve that problem for them is the real key focus.
And I think that's a really important point, too, because the oldest generation, the World War II generation, did not grow up in a world that was saturated with advertising as it is today. And today's youngest generation is growing up in a world where they see tens of thousands of advertising before they even start school. And so clearly the simplicity of a message might work better with an older group that isn't as accustomed to the ad images and to the bright colors and fast motion and things. And then with a younger group, you need to catch their attention to make your ads stand out amidst all of this clutter of advertising. And so here's again a case where if you only have older people on the team, do you think there might be a problem for them in getting the right message or conveying the message in a way that connects with very young people, or vice versa?
More than the most important point, I think you just hit right on, is about sifting through the noise today, how to cut through all of the messages and bombardment that people have in front of them. The best way, one of the best ways to do that is you can market test your message.
Now, let's talk just about your own personal experience for a few minutes. Obviously, you are of a younger generation. You're not part of the World War II generation or the baby boom. And if you could just think about, from your own point of view, if you were on a team for any project, not even necessarily advertising and marketing, but some sort of team that was made up of people of all the different generations, teenagers to the oldest adults, what kinds of interactions would you anticipate being difficult? What kinds of things would you want to see personally done to make it work for you? And what kind of contributions do you imagine each of the different groups being able to make?
If you, again, go in there and understand everyone's key strengths and experiences, whatever the team is, whatever the dynamic of that group, there's definite opportunities to again, find the mentorship you might need from more seasoned professionals. And then there's this exuberance of youth where there's a willingness to try different and new approaches. There's a young energy that's there as part of the team to take these different approaches. If you can meld those two things together, put those ideas, in a place where here are the interesting and different ideas, but then you have the team that can help steer those ideas and make them real, or again, build in the testing, build in the trials, build in the way to bring this to fruition, to make it successful at the end. That would be the ideal group.
Now, in order to do that, in order to make this group work together, we've talked already about having a facilitator who's conscious of the need to look at generational differences and different strengths and weaknesses. I know from my own experience, the older we get, the more inclined we are to sort of be reluctant to make change. We tend to be comfortable, frankly, and we don't really see the need to change things. What advice would you give people older than you in terms of working with your generation and not while guiding you, but not keeping you from being able to do new things?
Well, there's that message, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The tried and true is, it's tested, it works, here's the path. But things are not always so formulaic, and you can't just say plug in A, B, C, D. Again, people change and their experience changes as they grow, and the experience of a young person today is not the same as the experience of a young person 10 years ago and 20 years ago. So the process needs to be flexible. I mentioned we're facilitators. We're, in a broader sense, universal translators. And we're trying to interpret. There's so much information, again, about a product, about a service, about an audience, and how to make them all understand one another and communicate with one another and demonstrate how this product is filling this need and how you're making this connection to those different groups.
That's advice for managers, basically, of any type. And I like the word translators, because essentially what you're saying is for the manager, part of the role is going to have to be interpreting one culture for another. So taking the baby boomer culture and being able to explain it to Generation X and translate it into terms they can understand, or translate Generation X into terms that older adults can understand. So what you have is essentially being able to use multi-generational teams inside the workplace and attract multi-generational customers. Don, thank you very much for a very enlightening discussion about multi-generational advertising and workplace issues. And I appreciate your coming here to talk to us today.
Thanks, Susan.
We will now continue with the second question and answer session. We have received several questions from you today, and we will start presenting them in a moment. But first, I would like to clarify a few more issues before we turn to the question from the participants. Susan, today's world reality is characterized by uncertainty, change, and increasing global interaction. In your judgment, given your recognized expertise in studying and learning about different generations, what's the ideal or optimal generational mix in an organization? Or is there such a concept?
I think that it will depend largely on the organization. If there are certain kinds of organizations, such as advertising, which is one of the best examples, where if you are trying to reach a broad market, a broad range of people, you are going to need the perspective of multiple generations. There are probably occasionally businesses, organizations whose mission is such that having one generation in the workplace would be all right. I think, though, that anytime you have the different perspectives of different generations, you benefit from it.
Okay, great. Are there some professional areas or types of organizations that you believe are ideally suited for leadership by a person who is a member of a specific generation? Do you think there ought to be an age limit set for Generation A or World War II generation workers? How about the other extreme, the child labor?
Well, I think that leadership is dependent on having leadership qualities, and we tend to pick our leaders from older age groups because, in fact, they do have often more experience and a broader perspective on the organization